Hey guys, this is John Corabi, and you, my friends, are listening to Thunder Underground. Keep it loud.
Welcome to episode 446 of the Thunder Underground podcast. Trent here as always, and this week's great because the mighty John Corabi is returning to the podcast. This will be his second time on. The last time was a few years ago, so I'm excited to have him back because he's got a brand new solo album that is coming out here in a couple months. We're going to talk in detail about that, and of course he'll talk about his time with Motley Crue, The Scream, Union, talk about the Dead Daisies, talk about some of his early days getting into rock because this new solo album focuses on kind of the heyday of classic rock, 60s and 70s style sounds. He's already got a couple singles out from it you can check out now on streaming platforms, so hit that up so you know what we're talking about here. But in the meantime, I'm going to let you know who sponsors this podcast. DEB Concerts, a promoter based right here out of the Tulsa area. In fact, has brought John Corabi to Tulsa before, along with so many other great acts like Megadeth, Great White, Snoop Dogg, Saxon, Buck Cherry, LA Guns, Last in Line. The list is great and long. Doug from DEB Concerts also books the DEB Concerts, Roadhouse Stage, and the pre-party at Rocklahoma every year. And guess what? That announcement is coming in just a few days. Next Tuesday, February 24th, is when the Rocklahoma lineup will be announced that features bands that Doug has booked. And this year will be great, just like previous years, I can promise you that. So hit up DEB Concerts on social media, and their website is debconcerts.com to be kept up to date with everything they've got going on. And of course, we fill you in right here. I'm sure next time that I talk to you on the next episode, I'll be able to tell you who Doug booked for Rocklahoma. But until then, hit him up on those socials, like I said, and be on the lookout for future announcements. We've also got Sunset Tattoo shop located in Midtown Tulsa. Their tattoos are done good and proper. Of course, they're state licensed. They're Native American owned. They have a female artist on staff full-time. This is one of those tattoo shops that if you're a fan of rock or metal, which you're listening to this, so I'm guessing there's a high chance you are, this very much has that vibe. You know, Jake has been entrenched in the music scene going back into the 90s. His walls are covered with show posters, with autographs, with autographed memorabilia. He's a huge fan of the genre. In fact, he has tattooed many artists and bands that you're a fan of, I can promise you that. I've been tattooed by him a couple of times, and I'm very happy with it. I know many other people that have as well through Sunset Tattoo, and are always happy as well. They're always running specials, so get on their social medias, Sunset Tattoo Tulsa on both Facebook and Instagram, so you don't miss any specials that are happening. Last week for Friday the 13th, they ran a $30 tattoo special, which they've extended through this week. So if you're hearing this now, you might be able to still get that if you run there right now or this weekend. I don't know, they didn't give an end date. But hit them up. They accept walk-ins. You can also call ahead to set up a time to talk about what work you're looking to have done. And on those social media platforms, of course, you can see shitloads of pictures of their tattoos throughout the years. So hit them up and tell them you heard about them right here on Thunder Underground. Speaking of Jake at Sunset Tattoo, he used to own the bar and venue Downtown Lounge in downtown Tulsa, which I know many people from the Tulsa and Oklahoma area were familiar with because he always brought in killer shows to the downtown area, and a lot of bands that were playing like the Brady Theater, or the Tulsa Theater or the Cain's Ballroom would find their way over there. Me and Jason, who used to co-host this podcast with me, would also, pregame there before shows at Tulsa Theater, Cain's Ballroom, or BOK. And of course, we went there tons for shows that Jake put on. And I mention all this because one of those shows that Jake put on was John Corabi when he was doing his Motley Crue 94 anniversary tour, which I believe would have been 2014, right? Because it was the 20th anniversary. And I think maybe it was 2014 into 2015, so it's probably 2015 when he played Tulsa. And I'm also mentioning that, obviously it is subject to the ham for Corabi, but I wanted to talk about a show that's coming up here next weekend, Saturday, February 28th. Dime Store Riot will be performing at the Venue Shrine. Dime Store Riot will also be joined on that bill by My Nightmare, Stutter, and a mixtape catastrophe. Like I said, Venue Shrine, hit up their website to get tickets. Also hit up Dime Store Riot, or I believe any of the bands on the bill, and you can buy discount tickets from them. Save yourself a few bucks before you get to the door. Adam Raymond, the lead singer of Dime Store Riot, was on this podcast on the very last episode. Did a tribute to Brad Arnold of Three Doors Down, and I was joined by Adam because, as he talked about on that, Three Doors Down was his first concert, and it was one of those moments where when he was watching it, he kind of had that epiphany, that feeling that I want to do exactly what this guy's doing. I want to be on stage singing. And he grew up and he did it, and he's been doing it for a while now. A few different bands. Dime Store Riot, has really been a force in the Tulsa area, and they've been touring nationally now for a couple years. I've had him on the podcast here a couple years ago as the full band. CJ and Paulette have both been on here many other times with previous bands. Like I mentioned last time, need to get them back soon. Need to talk about all that. But the tie-in with that and what I just said about Corabi at the Downtown Lounge show when he was celebrating Motley Crue 94, the self-titled Motley Crue album, I believe that is the first night I ever met CJ. Me and Jason were out there. I believe it was me, Jason, my ex. And CJ was out there playing with his old band Grind. I believe maybe an acoustic performance. Maybe it was just him and Dell. And, we'd talked to them for a while. Just kind of the first time, like, hey, we're got this podcast we're starting. Because early 2015 was when we started this thing. I can't remember the exact date of this show. But, we had started as a social media thing the year before. So we were already kind of like out and about talking to bands, just not interviewing yet. But yeah, and then I believe the first time I met Paulette was also at Downtown Lounge as well, at another show. I could be completely wrong, but there you go. There's my tying in this show on February 28th at the Shrine with the first time I met at least one of the members of Dime Store Riot. And it plays into our guest here, Mr. John Corabi. And also mentioning the Shrine, I know Corabi played there probably 2018, 2019. I know I was out of town for work. Then he played the Ideal Ballroom in October of 2020, when shows were starting to slowly happen again. He went out and did a few acoustic shows. And that was the time that I got to interview him last time, which was episode 301, if you're interested in that. That one was a good lengthy, I believe it was like an hour and 15, 20 minutes. And we kind of talked about this solo album then as well. And he mentions that in the, well, not our kind of conversation, but he mentions in the upcoming interview here that, he had been working on this years ago and then kind of completely shelved it once he rejoined the Dead Daisies. So that's why he was talking about this 5 years ago, and then basically just now getting it finished in 2025 and out here for you in late April of 2026. But yeah, I've had the chance, throughout the years to see this man many times. I'd seen him, years before those shows I just mentioned at, a couple of different festivals. I'd seen him open for Tom Kiefer. I had seen him, of course, with Motley Crue. Never got the chance to see the Scream or Union, and I still haven't seen the Dead Daisies either, unfortunately. But I've seen the man tons of times solo, and speaking of that, he's going on a tour again with Tom Kiefer. They're rejoining forces once again. He'll be opening up for the Tom Kiefer Band this summer, and it's John Corabi and Friends, and that's something else we talk quite a bit about here in the upcoming interview, is his touring band and the band that recorded this album, or at least, some of the players that were on parts of the album are joining him on this tour. It's a fantastic band. And he'll be, if you're listening to this and you're in my area, he'll be in Oklahoma City at the Diamond Ballroom with Tom Kiefer on July 11th. So check out those tour dates so you can see if he's coming wherever you're near at. Right now he's overseas. I believe he was in like Scandinavia, like in Finland and Sweden recently, or this past week. I think I saw something. So if you're over in that area, you probably already know that he's coming your way, but if you don't, jump on the interwebs right now and find out when you can see John Corabi. But again, without trying to sound like too much of a fanboy, this is one of my favorite singers, basically since that Motley Crue album came out. I actually had the Scream album just a little bit before that Motley Crue album came out. It came out, I believe the Scream album came out in 90, might have been 91. A good friend of mine, Lonnie, had it, and then he, just kind of gave me a handful of CDs, and that was one of them. And I really dug it. And then once he joined Motley Crue, just that album to me is it's just monumental, and just it took it to another level for me, and I just became this massive fan of him. I was a massive fan of Motley Crue. I mean, that's why I feel like I was at a good age since I was a teenager, that I wasn't completely entrenched, because as you get older, I would imagine if you're 35, whenever all that happened, when Vince Neil got let go from Motley Crue and then they got John Corabi, it's probably a little harder for you to accept stuff like that once you're ingrained. I've been listening to this band for, at that point, 12, 13 years, and no Vince Neil, no Motley Crue. But I was 17 when that album came out, and I already liked John Corabi. And then Vince Neil's solo album came out before that, and it was great. So I was kind of already under the impression that, look, I'm getting two great albums now. A band I love's putting out an album, and the singer from that band's also putting out a cool album. And then the Motley Crue album came out, and it was even better than I ever hoped or imagined. And then later on, we got a couple albums from Union, which are really good. If you missed all that, Bruce Kulick, who was in Kiss and had left recently because they were doing their reunion in the late 90s, joined forces with Corabi. And then fast forward many years, he released an acoustic solo album where he redid some of the Crue and some of the Scream and Union stuff and had a few originals. Then he eventually joined the Dead Daisies, which is a phenomenal band. If you're out of the loop on that, there are several albums now. There's an album that includes Glenn Hughes on vocals and bass because he took over whenever Corabi left back in 2019, I believe it was. And then Corabi's been back, and there's been a couple albums since, and then there's a couple albums before that. So there's tons of music out there for you. If you're a fan and you're just, I like this dude's voice. He was in Motley Crue. I really like that album. And you're checking this out, but you're not familiar with the full depth of this guy's career and his work throughout the years, I implore you to check it out. Just one of the coolest voices in the history of hard rock, in my opinion. And speaking of cool voices in the history of hard rock, Robin McAuley is another one of those guys that I believe, like Corabi, people know him, people know the name, but they don't know the depth of their work outside of what they're most known for, and they kind of fly under the radar, and Robin McAuley has always been that guy. He did that great stuff with Michael Schenker in the late 80s, early 90s with the McAuley Schenker group, and he's been back, working on and off with Michael Schenker the last decade or so, and he's got a great new band called Black Swan, featuring Reb Beach of Winger and Whitesnake, and Jeff Pilson of Dokken and Foreigner, that has put out two fantastic albums, and they have another fantastic album. I can say that because I got to listen to an advance of it before I interviewed him that comes out next Friday, February 27th. The third Black Swan album will be out, and I mentioned that because the next episode will be with Robin McAuley talking all about that album, and of course a lot of other stuff throughout his history. And speaking of upcoming episodes, I also just recorded one with Mark Kendall of Great White. Mark Kendall, the original and only lead guitarist of Great White. He has been on this podcast twice before, but the last time was almost 9 years ago. The last episode he was on came out at the beginning of June in 2017. And here we are. That episode will be coming out either the end of February or the beginning of March of 2026. So it's very cool to have him back. And of course, if you've paid attention to any of the rock news sites, you saw that he was on American Idol a couple weeks ago because the current singer of Great White, Brett Carlisle, auditioned for American Idol. And instead of just going out there to singing the tracks, he brought Mark Kendall and Michael Lardy with him. Of course, Michael Lardy sat down at a piano. Mark Kendall had an acoustic guitar, and they performed House of Broken Love. And Brett Carlisle got the yes from the judges and got the ticket to move on and be one of the contestants on this season of American Idol. So if you're a fan of Great White and you didn't know that, you can check that out on Hulu, or check out the episode that he's on Hulu. Unfortunately, it is cut the fuck up. The ones where they show the full thing, here's a backstory of this person, them talking, doing some interviews, and then you get the full performance. And it's like a 5-6 minute segment. That wasn't the case. They lumped him with two other guys. They were also rock singers. One dude performed Motorhead, Ace of Spades, and the other dude performed Fuel, Hemorrhage. And of course, in typical mainstream television fashion, they lumped the three of them together, and it was like a 3 or 4 minute segment featuring three different guys. And of course, all three of them were funner to watch than probably anybody else on the show. I don't know. I didn't watch the rest of it, but there you go. Check it out. You can also just Google that or just probably search it on any social media platform and see the clip since it's like a minute. But I would assume usually those shows like that will release the full versions on their social or their YouTube channels and that kind of thing. So that'll eventually be out there. But I'm getting way off track here, talking too much about something that's coming in a week or two. Right now, we're talking about John Corabi, the man who made one of the coolest albums of the 90s, one of the coolest albums in history, in my opinion, with Motley Crue. Made an extremely amazing album called Let It Scream, and now he's got an amazing album coming out called New Day. And let's hear all about that. Here is John Corabi. As it states, and everything you're talking about this, it has this 60s, 70s vibe, which really harkens back to what you grew up on as opposed to what you've kind of become known for. So talk a little bit about that decision.
It's weird being in band situations. I love that. But there's a lot of compromise involved. Obviously, even with the Motley stuff, it was a great experience. I was, you know, uh, enthusiastic to say the least about being a part of the band. You know what I mean? But like a lot of that stuff was, you know, uh, me adjusting to who they were and how they did things. Um, but for me, honestly, even still to this day, um, I go to this little pub around the corner from my house with my wife, and they have that touch tune system, you know,
Yeah.
and it's hilarious because as soon as I start playing songs, everybody in the bar knows I'm in the building somewhere. You know what I mean? Because it's like the same genre of, it's like Bob Seger, Creedence Clearwater, Steely Dan, Zeppelin, Aerosmith, but I'll play Yes. Like there's like this genre of music,
Yeah.
and it's usually music from between when the Beatles did Rubber Soul to about 1980. You know what I mean? And this is all the shit that I grew up listening to. Uh, all the stuff, for lack of a better term, pardon my French. This is the stuff that knocks my dick in the dirt. You know what I mean? And so when I got together and I got offered the deal, I told the guys, I said, listen, the guys from Frontiers were awesome. They're like, we believe in you. You do what you want to do. And I said, okay, I just want you to know if you're expecting Motley Crue Part 2, that's not what I'm about. You know what I mean? So they were like, okay, yeah, you just do your thing. And so I told Marty I want to do a 60s, 70s type record, organic, you know. But the other thing I wanted to do is one of the things that now that we're talking about this, I don't know how old you are, but I'll be 67 in April. So I'm usually the oldest one in the room. But, the thing that I grew up with was like nowadays when you do music or you put a song out or an album out, everybody like immediately starts, I say everybody, the suits, radio stations, everybody, they try to figure out, okay, is this for classic rock radio, or is this for, grunge rock or alternative rock, college rock? Like, it's like there's all these categories that didn't exist until like 20 years ago. And, when I was a kid and I wanted to go to a record store, you just went to a record store and everything was listed alphabetically. You know,
Yeah.
there'd be a pile of records and it'd start with ABBA, and it would go down the line and, there'd be Johnny Cash and Glenn Campbell next to Deep Purple and Grand Funk Railroad. And, it was just, it was just one umbrella and it was music. So I told Marty, I said, man, I just want to get back to what I grew up with. And I go, I want an album that people are not going to be able to categorize or just go back to that old school way of thinking. So he was like, all right, cool. And the funny thing is, when I turned the record in like 4 months ago, whatever, 5 months ago, um, it was like, that's exactly what the record label said. They're like, dude, if you were trying to do the no box thing, you nailed it because this thing is all over the place, but in a good way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Lyrically, it feels like kind of throughout several of these songs as well, it has a real kind of introspective or kind of looking back vibe as well. Is that intentional, or that's kind of probably the way you write in general, though?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I only use I can only use myself as a springboard, but all the songs on here are just um, it's just like New Day. It's just kind of my mentality. Obviously, if anybody's been following my career, they know I've had a lot of ups and I've had a lot of downs. Even whether it's in the music industry or with relationships, girls, whatever. And it's just like, okay, didn't work out. All right, you know, tomorrow's a new day. So it's like just trying to be positive and keep moving forward. That's all that song's about. When I was young is just, a guy my age reminiscing about all the great things he's done, all the bad things he's done, but in conversation with your offspring, trying to like give them advice, like, hey, here's the mistakes I made, here's my successes, here's how I did it. Give them that information and that knowledge, I guess, and just saying, good luck with your life. This is how I did it, but hopefully you'll take this even further. So it is a bit introspective. 1969. I'm old enough to remember all the stuff that happened in 69. So it was just me talking about all the things that I remember happening in that year. You know what I mean? But again, I sat here, I made a comment to my wife with all the divisiveness and all the bullshit that's happening right now in the 24-hour, 7 days a week news cycle that we have.
Yeah.
I said to her, I go, you know what's weird? I go, we are as divided and stupid as we were in the 60s. I go, I lived the 60s. And I know there was people that were very for the Vietnam War, and there was others who were against it. And there was, you had the hippie movement, and then all the people that had short hair and suits and ties going to work. It was like these countercultures that were working against each other. And I go, the crazy part of it is we're as fucked up and divided now as we were 60 years ago. So I think subconsciously it made me just write 1969. You know what I mean?
I mean, I guess that's kind of a great segue into this question. Is it Do you pull inspiration from the same places you did when you're writing lyrics as you would have when you were younger? Like, say, when you first started writing songs in the 80s or whenever it was?
No, obviously, when I first started, I wouldn't even play you some of the shit that I wrote in the very beginning because it's just horrible. But, right when I got my first record deal with the Scream, or even prior to that, Angora, this band that I was in, you know, I was, you know, I, I had this notion that you had to write songs about sex, drugs, rock and roll, and fast cars, and living the rock star life. And so there's some lyrics I wish I go back and I listen to some of my earlier records. There's a few that I wish I could take back and redo. You know what I mean? But even some like the song "Shake Shake." It was just very sex, whatever. It's like about a girl that's ass is just swinging side to side. You're like, whatever. Oh, okay. And then I go back and I look at it and I go, oh God, what was I thinking? But I think as you get older, you get married, you have kids, you start paying more attention to things that are happening around you. How is this going to affect not just me, but my kids and my kids' kids? You know what I mean? So you start really uh, you start really looking at things in a different light as you get older. Each year you get older, you know what I mean? And even as far back as, if you think about it now without opening up a ugly can, you know, even when I was in Motley, I was already starting to touch on things with the song like Uncle Jack, which was honestly about my uncle who had taken advantage of and molested a bunch of young underage kids. And then you look at some of the shit that's going on right now with this Epstein list, and you're like, oh, we haven't figured that one out
Some
yet.
things never change. Yeah.
Some things never change. So there's this constant, barrage of news and, going outside and it's just whatever, whether, somebody else's you see shit that happens in the news that affected somebody else and put pen to paper and just start working out your dialogue and there's no shortage of shit to write about. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Well, you mentioned working with Marty Fredrickson. Did he co-write this with you? I mean, I know he's an accomplished songwriter, or was this
Yeah.
entirely you?
No. This is definitely Marty and I. I mean, there's stuff that I'm sure I know that I could actually sit down and write a song by myself without any help from anybody. But I actually enjoy working with Marty because I tend to overthink things sometimes and I'll just think something isn't good enough. And Marty just has this way of getting in my head. He knows what I want and he'll sit there and he's got this way of showing me the answer was right in front of me the whole time and I didn't see it. You know what I mean? So Marty and I work fast together and we work super well together, but we're friends too. I've known Marty since I was in the Scream.
Oh, okay.
And even when we're not writing, Marty rides, I ride, Paul Taylor rides. So it's not unusual for us to call each other and go, "Hey, dude, what are you doing today?" "Nothing." "What do you want to do?" Let's take a putt." And we'll all get on our motorcycles, and we'll ride for a few hours and then go stop and have lunch, a couple cocktails, ride home and call it a day. You know what I mean? So I just enjoy, and Marty kind of blows me away. You know what I mean? I just sit there and I watch him over the years write for people like Ozzy Osbourne, Def Leppard, Motley, Brother Kane.
Yeah.
He's worked with the Dead Daisies, but then I also see him write with Tim McGraw, Carrie Underwood, Faith Hill. I mean, he writes music for all these different people. And, there's a part of me that's like, man, I wish I could just personally get to that point where I could just sit at home in my studio and just write music for other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And he's just so good at it. And he gets all different types of music. So there's a part of me that's a bit envious of Marty as well. You know what I mean? So I enjoy working with him. He's a good friend and funny guy, easy to get along with. So when I when I was doing this record, I was just like, "Hey, dude, you want to help me out on this?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure, whatever." You know, and we just go get a couple bottles of wine or bottle of whiskey or something, some edibles, and we just knock ourselves out with some acoustic guitars. Call it a day.
Yeah, I'm sure that friendship helps, like in the production aspect, as far as someone telling you, like, hey, maybe do it this way. Probably easier coming from a friend than someone you just met.
Well, but Marty, Marty's done so many records, and I will say this, even with this one, at the end, like Marty would suggest something, but he doesn't try to force it on you. You know what I mean? It's like he sat there, like for example, on When I Was Young, we were kind of, for a lack of a better term, we were kind of going for an almost old faces Maggie May sort of vibe on that song. And so we got all done, we mixed it, and then a couple days later, Marty goes, "Hey, dude, just out of curiosity, I was thinking, you know, do you want to try some mandolin on this? Your call. It's your record, but I think mandolin would be really cool. I mean, we kind of went for that Maggie May vibe. I think a mandolin would be great." And I go, "Yeah, let's try it." And as soon as he sent it to me, I go, "Yep, nailed it. Let's put it to bed. Let's go." So he's got this way of suggesting things without being overbearing about it. You know what I mean? So I just love working with the dude. That's all I can say.
Was it his suggestion to bring in Charlie Starr, or were you already friends with Charlie as well?
No, I met Charlie with the Dead Daisies. Actually, we were staying at a hotel in New York, and they just happened to come in, and I obviously I knew who Blackberry Smoke was, but I finally met Charlie, and we were hanging out with their drummer, God rest his soul, Britt, that passed away a few years ago, and Charlie's not really a drinker, so we were sitting in the bar for a minute. He had a Diet Coke or whatever, and then he went up to bed, and we sat and talked with Brent for a while, and then when I got home, I friended Charlie on like Instagram, Facebook, all that shit. So when we did Faith, Hope, and Love, I was sitting there listening to it, and I loved Charlie's playing. So I said to Marty, I go, it's kind of got like it's bluesy R&B, Southern. It's just got this stank on it that I love. So I suggested to Marty, I go, what do you think about having Charlie Starr maybe play on this track? And Marty goes, yeah, great idea, dude. Give him a buzz. So I just reached out to him and I said, hey, dude, would you be interested in playing on this song? And it's kind of funny how the whole thing worked out. So I asked Charlie, I said, how much do you charge to do a session? Well, let me hear the song. So I sent him the tune. He goes, dude, I love the song. I'll do it for nothing. Fuck it. So he played on my track. And then about a week later, I got a text message from him. And he sent me a phone recording of just him sitting around with an acoustic guitar playing this. It was like this awesome rhythm thing. And then he starts singing, look into my rearview mirror. and then he scatting some stuff, and then he came up with this chorus idea, and it was like, I don't need that memory anymore. So I go, oh, that's kind of cool. Played it for my wife. She goes, yes, it's great. I played it for Marty. He goes, let's do it. So we changed the key to suit my voice. And then, like a couple days later, I sent Charlie the track back and I go, hey, dude, that thing you sent me the other day, Marty and I finished it. Here's a rough. Check it out. What do you think? Out of respect, it was his idea. And then he just wrote me back. He goes, brother, I'm smiling from ear to ear. I love it. So Charlie actually helped us write that memory. And then he played lead guitar on Faith, Hope, and Love.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to ask because it didn't list like on the press release. It just mentioned him playing, but it didn't say what songs. And I was going to
Yeah,
ask if he was on One More Shot because that kind of sounded like it could have been him too. But
no. So I'll explain that as well. Charlie played the lead parts and some rhythm guitars on Faith, Hope, and Love.
okay.
And then the song That Memory, which is, I believe, song number 2 on the record, was the idea that Charlie had sent me. And then Marty and I finished it, and I did all the guitars on that one.
Okay.
But Marty, again, this is, I apologize for the length of my answers,
Oh, no, I love it.
but Marty had just said to me, like, I did most of the guitar work on the record. And Marty goes, bro, I love your playing, man, but I think there's a couple songs we need a little more fire and somebody that plays a little faster than you do. And I go, okay. So I come home, go to sleep, get up the next morning, pour coffee, light a cigarette. I'm out checking my emails. And my phone, I got a text message from Richard Fortus from, Guns N' Roses. Where Richard and I started with the Dead Daisies.
Okay.
Richard was the guitar player. Anyway, Richard goes, hey, dude, I saw you're doing a solo record. If you need any help with the guitars, let me know. I'd love to do it. So I'm like, I called him on the phone. I said, well, as a matter of fact, I've got a few tracks that Marty was just talking about. And I sent him 3 songs thinking that he would pick whatever one he liked the best. Because he also told me that he was under a bit of a time crunch. He was getting ready to go back out with Guns. So I go, all right. And I shit you not, like I sent him 3 tracks. Next morning, my phone pinged and he goes, I just emailed those songs back to you. And I took them into Marty. We uploaded them into the session, the solos. And Marty goes, these solos are great. I don't have to do anything. So Charlie played on Faith, Hope, and Love. Richard did the solos for One More Shot, 1969, and Good to Be Back Here Again.
Very cool. I absolutely love the Dead Daisies song "Love That'll Never Be." Talk about the choice to include a new version as well on this.
Well, so the thing is, I had already written that song with Marty,
Okay.
and the version that you're hearing now on my solo record is the original version.
Okay.
But when we got into the studio with the Daisies, obviously the Daisies, we play with a little more muscle than this new record. So I suggested the song to the band, and they liked it, but they wanted to give it a little more oomph. So I think the version that I have now, it's got acoustic guitars and strings, and it's very produced. Where the version that we did, we took actual parts out of the song. The Daisies version is about, I believe it's like a minute shorter or more. So we took parts out of the song and we approached it more in the lines of like maybe the Allman Brothers, where the whole band comes in, Doug's playing slide guitar. But the thing was, it was weird just how it worked out because we did the Light 'em Up record and we also did a blues record. And like we put Love That'll Never Be out, but it was just the way it was slotted with the record label. They put out this last single, Love That'll Never Be. And then, like, I don't know, it was like 13 days later, they dropped a single, the first single for the blues record, which kind of, in some ways, it just kind of stopped the momentum of the other song. So I was like, I went back and I said, you know what? I'm going to put the original version of Love That'll Never Be, and I'll call it a reprise or reprise, whatever. We'll do this version so people can hear what the original version was like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Did you write it with that in mind of like this is a just a John Corabi song and then you brought it into the Dead Daisies, or like how did the process go of
well,
deciding to use it on Light 'em Up?
well, if you remember, there was a point where I was going to do a solo record because I left the Daisies in 2019,
Right.
and I just wanted a break. And it was crazy. I was super busy in 2019 and 2020. And then I was like, oh, I'll do a solo record. I was going to do a solo record, but I was super busy. And then COVID hit in 2020. So I'm like, well, okay, that kind of put a chink in things. So I wrote a book, because we had almost 3 years off.
Yeah.
So I wrote a book. I took Pro Tools classes finally so that I could have a little home studio and figure out how to record myself. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to do a solo record. And it was Marty that actually convinced me, like, people aren't doing records the way they used to do. So let's just work on a song. We'll put it out, let it sit for a month or two. And then you put out another single, let that sit while you're working on your record. And it was funny after the first two songs of which are on the record.
Yeah.
I always had the idea of doing a solo record, but I kind of stopped because I'm like, I don't understand this fucking streaming thing and algorithms and hashtags and all that shit. You know what I mean? There's, guys like me aren't getting radio anymore. MTV doesn't exist. So it's like these older, when I say these older guys, like guys like me, I got to figure it all out again. So I kind of stopped. And then I went back. Daisies called and asked me back. So I went back in 23. We toured the whole year. And then we went right into the studio and we did Light 'em Up, the blues record. And we were on tour for another year and a half. And then it was funny. Last year, Frontiers just reached out to me and go, hey, dude, would you like to do a solo record? So I was like, okay. You know what I mean? And it just kind of worked out. And shortly after I figured that I'm going to do a solo record, the Daisies came to me and said, you know what? We've been going pretty hard since 2013. We're going to take a year off. And I was like, perfect. I can do my solo record, put it out, tour it, support it, and then just go right back and do the Daisies, the following year. So it's just, again, it just all kind of happened organically. You know what I mean?
Yeah. With most of these songs being written, in the last few years and recorded, I think the press release said around last summer was the decision to include Everyday People, I'm guessing after Sly passed as a
Well, to be
tribute.
honest, with you, we already had Love That'll Never Be in the can, Cassie Bella, and Your Own Worst Enemy. All the rest of this stuff is new.
Okay.
So, like, we only had like the three song. There was ideas that I had, and I brought him to Marty, and he's like, "Okay, cool." You know, we worked on New Day when I was young. All this stuff was all new stuff. We sat around, we mapped things out on acoustic guitar, and then we got into the studio and we just started recording shit and laying it down.
Was the decision to include Everyday People like something that happened after Sly passed as a tribute, or were you already thinking of doing
No,
that?
that was I didn't even, you know, to be honest with you, I forgot he passed, but I wanted to do you know, and I have a couple of ideas that are just so obscure that people are just going to laugh. At some point, I'm going to release these other songs that I had in mind. But we were talking, and I said to Marty, I said, "Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I'd like to do a cover. You know, like the Daisies always do a cover. It wasn't that unusual, even back in the day. You know, Grand Funk Railroad was known for one of their versions of Heartbreaker by the Rolling Stones. You know, so it wasn't unusual for bands to cover other bands. So he goes, "Well, what are you thinking?" And I told him the songs, and one of them was Everyday People. And as soon as I said Everyday People, he goes, "I love that song. Let's do it." And I believe he told me that he used to cover it uh, when he was with his when he was on tour with Steven Tyler.
Okay.
Steven used Marty's band as was his backing band, and they were called Loving Mary.
Oh, okay.
And I think they had done that a few times at some shows. So I was like, all right, cool, let's do it. So we just worked up a version of it. Uh, you know, we added some parts to it. Like there's a guitar solo where we actually go off and we do it. We wrote a part for it, and then we come back to the groove. But I've always loved Sly and the Family Stone as a kid. I thought the man was a genius, and I'm like, it's funny. I just said earlier, I go to the bar and I play the same songs all the time, and that's one of the songs that I always that, and I play that. I want to take you higher, and I dance to the music, and so I'm like, let's do Everyday People, you know. And Marty was all about it, so we kind of do. It's like Sly and the Family Stone, but it's got a kind of a T-Rex bang a gong vibe to it as well. You know what I mean?
Just speaking on Sly, I mean, last year, Sly, Brian Wilson, Ace Frehley, Ozzy, that's just like a insane amount of not just, geniuses, but icons as well. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a little nerdy little trivia thing that you can bet somebody at a bar on. One of the things that I love about Everyday People um, is that the original song. Do you play any instruments at all?
No.
Okay. Well, but I think you'll understand this. If you listen to the original version by Sly and the Family Stone, it's like boom, 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 and it's got this thing going through it, and it's a G, and then what they call a G sus chord, and then back to the G again. But the song never changes. He never goes to a different chord. So the original version, I believe, is like 2 minutes and 40 seconds long,
Yeah.
and it's one chord through the whole song. And I just sit there and I go, how much of a genius was that guy that he wrote a song with one chord in it that had such a memorable melody and chorus, and then the lyrics were as relevant today as they were in 1969 when it came out.
Yeah.
So it was like this brilliant piece of music with socially relevant lyrics and he did it all with one fucking chord. And I go, that's kind of awesome. Now, here's the trivia. So that song had one chord. He didn't do it once, he did it twice. He did it with Everyday People, and he went right back and did another song with one chord in it called Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself.
Wow.
That's a genius.
Yeah.
I can write a song that's going to be awesome with one chord.
Right. Very cool. Your live shows coming up, are John Corabi and friends, and this lineup is pretty impressive. I mean, you mentioned earlier Paul Taylor and of course Marty. Like, how did the whole process of bringing this together, as well with Troy Lucetta and Michael Devin?
Again, it was all just it was the universe going, no, go that way. You know what I mean? Marty got involved because he just said, I love this record. It's a great record, and I had fun doing it. Now I want to go on tour with you. Paul Taylor actually played on a few tracks, and then he heard the whole record. He goes, I want to go on tour. Jeremy Asbrock, my other guitar player, Jeremy played with Ace Frehley and Gene Simmons, but like back in 13, 14, Jeremy played with me actually prior to those guys. So I pulled Jeremy back into this thing, and Michael Devin I play with in the Daisies,
Right.
but I've known Michael since 1999. So I go, hey, dude, we're off. Do you want to do some shows with us? He goes, yeah. So I played him the record, and then he was like, yeah, dude, this is great stuff. And as it turned out, Michael lives, uh, he's in the process of moving, but he lived in Florida. And when he would come up here to Nashville to look for homes, he would stay at Troy Lucetta's house. Him and Troy know each other really well. So, uh, I'm like, oh, I got to find a drummer. Michael's like, well, Troy Lucetta's heard the record, dude. He loves it. And I'm like, dude, from Troy, from Tesla? Like, he's not going to want to slug around in a van like old school. And he goes, give him a call, dude. So I just called Troy, and he had heard the whole record. He goes, hey, dude, count me in. Like, that was it. Done. End of story. So I just called my manager. I go, dude, this band is kind of scary. I go, I got, Troy Lucetta, Michael Devin, Jeremy Asbrock, Paul Taylor, Marty Fredrickson, and myself. And he's like, all right. So everybody's been kind of freaking out about the, for lack of a better term, the pedigree of everybody in the band. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's been pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to take anything away from Troy, but was your first idea to ask Ian, or was he already wrapped up with something, or?
Well, yeah, but Ian was my first choice. Like, I just assumed that he would be there when I needed him. But Ian, when Ian was a kid, when we lived in California, and I don't remember exactly the time frame, but I think it was like late '90s, early 2000s. Corn was really big. Uh, Lincoln Park. Ian went to school with some of those Lincoln Park guys.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Well, there was another band that did a record or two that came out around the same time from the same area called Steppa. And Ian loved those guys. And so he called me on the phone about a year or so ago. And he goes, Dad, do you remember me telling you about that band Steppa when I was a kid? I go, yeah. He goes, dude, they just called and asked if I would do their record. So he was obviously stoked about it. So he wound up doing the album, and then he flew out to California, did a couple shows with them. And they asked him if he wanted to play drums for them. So right around the time I was putting my thing together, Ian called me. He goes, hey, Dad, I don't want you to think that I don't want to hang out with you, but I'm kind of feeling like I want to do this Steppa thing. It's kind of more my cup of tea. And I was like, okay, yeah, dude, whatever. It's all good. So he's going to do that. And then as it turned out, Michael turned me on the Troy, and it's just been a blessing for everybody. Ian's happy with Steppa. I'm happy with the band that I put together. And, you know, and Ian, even if Ian's not working, I may still bring him out to help me sell my merch or whatever, just help us out and, you know, whatever. So it's all good.
Yeah. What can we expect, like song wise, on these shows? I mean, it's a solo show. Does that mean there's going to be songs from the Scream and the Crew and Union?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the cruise stuff's going to be difficult because, again, I know a lot of people don't understand this, but if you play a guitar and you hit
Yeah.
the what they call the low E string, for everybody else it's an E string. But Motley from day one, even on their first record, Too Fast for Love, they took their guitars and tuned them down a whole step. So the E string was actually a D. So doing the Motley stuff is a bit difficult because then that means we got to bring two or three guitars with us, or
Hmm.
you know what I mean? So I'm going to do what I can as far as Motley goes.
If you stick to
But
like Love Shine or Drift Away, you know.
well, even those, but now see what I was thinking is maybe in the middle of our set we do a little acoustic segment where the guys leave stage and I play a few things. So
Okay.
I might do Drift Away or one of those tunes in the middle. But again, like Misunderstood, that's a weird open D tuning. That's a whole other guitar that I need to bring. Same with Love Shine.
Oh, okay.
So that one's going to be a little. I got to figure it out, but we're definitely going to do some. We'll do some Motley stuff, but we're going to do some Scream, some Union, Motley, maybe even a few Dead Daisies songs, and then focus a bit more on the new
Yeah.
stuff. So we'll see, but it's going to be a little bit of everything. And then again with this band, and the talent, it won't be unusual for us to go, hey dude, let's do a deep cut Deep Purple song and just kind of learn it at sound check and then just go play it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever. So you never know.
Yeah, and your U.S. dates, you're touring with Tom Kiefer, and I know you've got at least a decently long history with him because I know you toured with him back in the day, but also I saw you open for him in Dallas like probably 12, 14 years ago as
Yeah,
well. You're
Tom
doing
and I.
acoustic,
Yeah, but Tom and I are both born and raised in Philadelphia.
right?
So I've known Kiefer since in God late '70s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, we go way back. We cut our teeth playing cover songs in the same circuit back in Philadelphia, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland. So Tom and I have known each other for a gazillion years. And then even when we're not playing shows together, him and his wife, my wife has a hair salon. So Tom and his wife come over to our house all the time to get their hair cut and whatever. So we go way back. And Tom's always been incredibly supportive. When I did my acoustic record in 2013, he took me out on one of the last Cinderella tours. I think it was 2023. I went out and I did some shows acoustically with him and Winger, and he's bringing us back out again this year. He heard some of my solo stuff here at the house, and he's like, "Man, this is great," you know. And he went, "Well, we have the same agent as well, which helps." So we're just like, "Hey, man, let's do some shows together." Okay, cool, let's make it happen. So he went to the agent. And he goes, "Put Corabi on some of the shows." So it's going to be a good time.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. I know you're coming close to here, you're coming to Oklahoma City, so I'm going to try to hit that one up for sure.
So are you in Texas or?
No, I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, the old Canes Ballroom.
Yeah.
I love that place, dude. I
Yeah.
played there with the Scream Union. What a
Right.
great. Is it still going or?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Finally, I mean, it sold, changed hands a few years ago, but it's still actively going.
Yeah,
Concerts
and
all
I
the
just
time.
I just did a. It was a couple of years ago. There was a new club opened up, and they asked me to come and play like their grand opening. I did an acoustic set somewhere in Tulsa.
Last time you were on my podcast was in person, like at the Ideal Ballroom. I don't know if that probably wasn't it because that had already been open, but
No, this was I
yeah.
can't remember the name of it, but it was a club. It was in downtown,
Okay.
and I just remember I took my motorhome out. Brought my wife, and we parked next to this. The door was like you walk out my door of my motorhome and walk into the club,
Yeah.
and it was kind of tucked away in this driveway thing, and
Oh, the
but
venue Shrine? Was it the Shrine? Is that so?
maybe
Okay.
yeah, but it just poured. It was like a monsoon that night.
Oh, okay.
But it was awesome. The place was packed. I had a great time. It was killer.
Very cool. One more question for you. I know you mentioned earlier the blues album that the Daisies did, Looking for Trouble. Were there any
Yep.
songs on there that you particularly like was your choice to have on there or that you were really excited about singing? Or
It was all like a group thing. I mean, there's so many songs we could have done.
yeah.
I mean, I remember even going to the band about doing um in my time of dying the like Zeppelin on the physical graffiti, but it's weird. That's an old blues song that was originally called Jesus Make My Dying Bed. And, you know, and we researched it. It's like, okay, here's Zeppelin's version. Oh, shit. Bob Dylan did a version back in like 64 or something. And his version was brilliant. If you ever get a chance to check out In My Time of Dying by Bob Dylan, it's really cool version.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, we could do that one. And so we were just throwing things in. Uh, we probably could have done 5 blues records because we were all throwing different ideas into the pot. So we all had our hands in all the tunes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Speaking of Bob Dylan, I don't know if you're aware, but the Bob Dylan Museum's in Tulsa. So next time you're in the area, you should check it out. It's pretty impressive.
I would love
Like
that.
like it's part of the Woody Guthrie Center. I was surprised they put it here, but it was just because of his love for Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember even there was, God, well, I think they were saying when Woody Guthrie was dying, Bob would go and sit in his hotel room with him and show him lyrics and play guitar and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that doesn't surprise me that he's in there.
Right on, man. Well, I'm absolutely loving the new album and looking forward to seeing you live again. I appreciate you taking the time with me once again.
All right, and if we do get to Oklahoma, buddy, if you make it up there, smack me in the back of the head. We'll go have a whiskey together.
All right, will do.
All right, brother. Thank you.
There you go, John Corabi of the Dead Daisies, formerly of Motley Crue, formerly of the Scream, formerly of Union, formerly of Rat. That's one thing I didn't mention when I was kind of running through, the stuff he had done in the past. I saw him perform with Rat as well. He joined in as a rhythm guitarist when they were touring around the turn of the century. I feel like it was around like early 2000, like 2000, 2001 or 2. This was before Stephen Pearcy came back and Jizzy Pearl was the vocalist at the time. And John Corabi, who was just as awesome as Jizzy Pearl, was just standing to the side every once in a while, doing some background vocals. I believe actually, I could be totally remembering this wrong, but I feel like he might have sang one song during the set. I could be totally misremembering that, so I should probably look that up before I should say things like that. But hey, if you're listening to this and you're a huge fan, or if you're John Corabi himself, you could probably respond and say whether that is true. But that is something to bring up. I know I've seen interviews before where he talks about it, but it just doesn't come up a lot anymore. So it'd be kind of interesting next time he's on the podcast to talk a bit about that time with Rat But he also was a part of the Eric Singer project as well around that time. More stuff going on. Like I said, check it all out. Look for this new solo album that is coming here in about 2 months. I believe it's April 24th. You can check this thing out. It's kind of from Frontier Records. They've put out so much great music over the last few years. They've provided an avenue for a lot of these guys to put out solo albums. Constructed a few great groups. I know the Black Swan that I mentioned earlier with Robin McCauley is another one that was kind of a suggestion by Frontier Records with Jeff Pilson, and they put this band together, and now it's phenomenal. Happy to see that there's a record label out there catering to, people like us who love these genres of rock, hard rock, and metal. Huge thank you to Jody Best of Best Bet Promotions for her unwavering support of this podcast throughout the years. She goes back as far as probably any publicist that I've ever worked with, at least as far as consistently. She's got to be the longest running. It feels like John Freeman from Freeman Promotions is another one of those that has been around that whole time, and I know they're kind of a dual thing on this deal with Corabi, so I'll throw in a huge thanks to John Freeman as well, and of course a massive thank you to John Corabi for taking some time out there to hit me up on Zoom and talk about this great new album. I had a chance to listen to it a few times, and I absolutely love it. It's that great old school, Stonesy, like he mentioned, the Faces, upbeat, bluesy, whiskey-drenched rock and roll from the late 60s into the mid-70s, that kind of thing. Keith Richards would be proud. That kind of, it doesn't sound like the Stones really, but you know what I mean? You get that vibe. This is episode 446, and episode 301 was the last time Corabi was here. About, a little over 5 years ago now. Almost halfway through the run of this podcast was the last time he was on here, because we're approaching 11 years in about 3 months. It'll be 11 years. So right over half this podcast to go, Corabi was here. So check that out, episode 301. Tons of different talk than what we talked about here. He talked quite a bit about his autobiography that he was working on at that time. And that is now, well, he mentioned that, of course, in this episode as well. And that's now been out a couple years. I've got that thing. You need to pick that up as well. I got an edition that included a vinyl. How about that? Like I mentioned earlier on, next episode, Robin McCauley of Black Swan, the McCauley Schenker Group, Michael Schenker Fest, Survivor, all kinds of great stuff this guy has done throughout his history. And this will be his 5th time on the podcast. He's one of the best guests to have on a podcast because he's one of the nicest guys in rock and roll. The most recent episode before this one was about another one of those guys that can have that label of one of the nicest guys in rock and roll, and as Brad Arnold of Three Doors Down. He unfortunately passed away, lost his battle to cancer a couple weeks ago, and I put together a tribute episode featuring, like I mentioned up front, the vocalist of Dime Store Riot, Idam Raymond. Also featured another great local musician, Jeremy Harrington, and it also featured Robin McCauley. Because when I talked to Robin McCauley, I'd mentioned kind of the loss last year of like several big names. We had Ozzy, Ace Frehley, Brian Wilson, and Sly Stone. I mean, those are 4 monumental figures in the history of music, in the history of rock and roll. And then before he talked about anything, he said, hey, I want to mention the unfortunate loss of Brad Arnold. And the way he talked about him, you could tell he was a fan. So it's always cool to get a perspective of an older musician, talking about a younger musician. I mean, even though Brad Arnold has now been, before he passed away, had been doing this at a national mainstream level for 26 years, to see, a guy that's been doing it nearly twice as long as that, show his reverence and his love of the Three Doors Down music was very cool. So check out that episode. And then I mentioned before, Mark Kendall will be coming up soon. It'll be his 3rd time on the podcast. He's got lots of great stuff to talk about with the American Idol appearance, new music coming from Great White, all kinds of stuff. And hey, if these are these kind of guys that I'm talking about with McCauley Schenker, Great White, Motley Crue, The Scream, if this is your genre, I assume it is, you're still listening. Man, throughout the history of this podcast, 444 episodes before these last 2, you could dive back through. There's been a huge long list of guys from the 80s rock era, members of Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, Twisted Sister, Queensryche, Kix, LA Guns, Junkyard, Warrant, Firehouse, Tesla multiple times, LA Guns, Saxon, Getting Heavier, Testament, Megadeth, The Black Dahlia Murder, Toxic Holocaust, Anthrax. John Bush was on this podcast just a couple months ago. That was one of the highlights of my nearly 11 years doing this. Michael Monroe of Hanoi Rocks was another highlight. Glenn Hughes is one of my all-time highlights, right up there with John Corabi, a former member of John Corabi's band, the Dead Daisies. But Glenn Hughes is known for a plethora of other things, and he's been on this podcast 3 times, and I can't express how amazing it is to talk to a Mount Rushmore level rock and roll vocalist like Glenn Hughes. But also members of Candlebox, Breaking Benjamin, Skillet, Hellstorm, 3 Doors Down, like I just mentioned. Check it out, thethunderunderground.com. You can listen to everything there. You can listen pretty much anywhere podcasts are heard. Wherever you're listening, hit like, follow, subscribe so you don't miss those future upcoming episodes. Follow on all the socials. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube has daily has daily content that comes out. And it has content from this podcast. Like you'll see a clip of John Corabi, a clip or 2 here in the next day or 2. There's a recent clip of that Mark Kendall interview that's not out yet, but I threw the American Idol comments out there already. So besides that stuff, though, there's daily content like, yesterday was the anniversary of Bon Scott passing away 46 years ago. So I had a couple reels about that. It was Tony Iommi's birthday, so I had a reel about that. Arch Enemy announced their new vocalist, so I had a reel about that. And so you can kind of see it's current news, birthdays, album anniversaries, milestones, all kinds of great stuff. So follow on all the socials so you don't miss any of that content. And anytime you see a podcast or anything I post, I would absolutely love you for the rest of my life if you hit like, share, or commented on it, because that is a simple, easy way to help out this podcast because more people see those posts as well. I've also got merch. Hit me up. Let me know what you're thinking. All right, and once again, a huge thank you to DEB Concerts, Sunset Tattoo, Best Bet Promotions, and of course, John Corabi. And until next time.
Thunder Underground, y'all.